Ancient Geeks, a podcast from a couple of geeks of a certain age. We look at the development of geek culture through the lens of our youth as informed by decades of geekery. We were geeks before it was chic. Prepare to fire the photon torpedoes while in a wormhole. I'm your co-host, Stephen Taylor.
I'm your co-host, Tom Grant.
Today on Ancient Geeks, we're looking at Star Trek: The Motion Picture. How are you today, Tom?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm doing just fine. So before we
That
get
doesn't
into...
sound fine. Just fine.
Well, I'm just fine.
Not better than fine.
I'm
just
trying.
Fine.
Yeah. I'll get better. Here we go.
Okay.
We were talking politics offline, so I'm still. It's okay. Speaking of happier things, How about this week in geekery, Tom? What have you been up to this week in geekery?
So continuing to prep for future episodes. So I've been watching some more Godzilla movies from the Showa era. That's how much of a Godzilla geek I am now, that I recognize the stages of development of Toho giant monster movies, and also watching Andor season 2. I'm close to finishing that off. How about you?
Yeah, so I've been, because of our recent foray into the X-Men, I've been doing a little bit, although I haven't gotten as deep as I had intended, looking at some of the older X-Men that I never read. So I'm looking at I really want to read the Neil Adams stuff, but I just kind of randomly got into some of the older Stan Lee stuff. And I can kind of see why the book didn't do so great. It really is kind of not as good as some of the other stuff that was being done at the time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I'm still working my way through Burns' Elspin, which I think is quite good. And I still have a few more to go in that one.
Yeah, there was like that middle period, like between the first X-Men episodes and the Neil Adams episodes again. I did it again. I called a comic book issue an episode. This is a quirk I've got to put a kibosh on.
You can call some Star Trek episodes issues later if you like.
I'll do that.
To create balance in the Force.
That's right. Or balance of terror. But anyway, like the stuff in the middle, the art was really bad. Like I seem to remember, like Don Heck played a prominent role as the artist.
Yeah, the artist.
The villains were lackluster, and it was just.
Yeah, I'm reading some issues right now where the Blob and Eunice are like disguised as X-Men, like robbing banks or something. It's like I don't even know what's going on here.
Thankfully, they found their footing years later.
That's right. Anyway. What we're going to talk about today is Star Trek, kind of picking up where we left off last week with the animated series. We'll talk a little bit about what I might refer to as Star Trek in the Wilderness, but then we'll hit hard talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Before we get into that, so what's the theme music you would use if we could afford the license, Tom?
I would pick the Klingon theme music from the first scene of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
That's an excellent choice.
How about you?
I will go ahead and pick just the main Star Trek march that Goldsmith, the theme that he proposed or composed, not proposed. He must have proposed it at some point, but he actually composed it as well. Or if he just wanted to have sound cue, and I don't even know how to describe it. There's this noise whenever they're in V'ger. Yeah, it's like some kind of weird. We could do that too. Sounds like a piece of metal almost being shaken.
It's sort of like the Star Trek version of the Law and Order.
That's right.
that sound effect. Don't.
So anyway, the 1970s are an interesting time for Star Trek, right? So Trek is canceled in 1969 after a lackluster ratings late on a Friday in the third season. We talked last week about how in 1973, 1974, there was the animated series on Saturday morning cartoons. And then there was all this talk apparently about reviving the series. There was talk about a TV movie. This development starts in the mid 1970s. And anyone that's read this history, which you can find in various places, there was this talk about the God Thing as a possible movie, which in some ways sounds like the plot of the next the motion picture. Another one is Planet of the Titans, which also involves possible gods. I'm not sure what the obsession was in the mid 1970s in the Star Trek minds that we had to have something to do that was supernatural. Of course, There was the renaming of or the naming of the original space shuttle, the Enterprise, which was sort of a testament to the popularity of the show. And then there's this talk about creating this thing called Phase Two, which would have been a new Star Trek TV show following on from the original with almost all the original cast, not counting Leonard Nimoy. And it was going to help launch this Paramount TV network that never came to pass. And of course, we'll get to the movie in a minute, but did you know about any of this Phase Two stuff at the time, Tom, or when did you learn about it?
Much later. I mean, at the time, I had absolutely no knowledge of it. How about you?
No, the same. I don't
Yeah.
think I learned about it until like maybe the late '80s, maybe even later than that.
Yeah, and it got pretty far along to the point where they were building sets.
Yes, actually, I do know when I first learned about it. I first learned about it when it came to my attention that some of the scripts in season two of The Next Generation were rewrites of scripts for that show.
Hmm.
There was one called The Child, where Deanna Troi gets pregnant by some space alien, as one
Right.
does. And there was one actually a couple seasons later, The Devil's Due, I think, is that right? Where, there's this alien that pretends to be the devil, and they kind of
Oh, right. Yes.
and
Yeah.
Astra, I think, was her name, and Data has to be an attorney and all
Yeah.
this kind of
She's
business.
sort of a vampy character.
Yes,
So were either of those original scripts Roddenberry scripts? Because they really sound like Roddenberry ideas.
I don't. That's a great question. I don't think so, but it could be. It
Okay.
could be. But I take your point on that. But and I know there was a book that came out in 1997 that had a lot of details about it, and then
Mhm.
you can find quite a bit of stuff online now. I went and I'll post some of this as we either in advance of this episode or certainly after onto Reddit and whatnot. You can find some of the screen tests for some of the characters, stuff I hadn't seen before. Actually, there's a couple of very brief clips of David Gautreaux playing Zahn, the Vulcan that was supposed to replace Spock, doing a passable job as a Vulcan. I think it is worth pointing out, and this I also kind of knew. It's pretty obvious too when you look at the motion picture. You know, the characters of Ilea, which you can also find some screen tests of Ilea in sort of TOS era uniforms online, and the character of Will Decker were created for Phase Two, and of course they end up really being Riker and Troy in Next Generation. The analogs are quite direct, and Zahn, this Vulcan character, in many ways becomes Data later. I think that's sort of an interesting sort of follow on from all this, where you can sort of see some of this evolution over time. But all of this gets, and if you look on, again, you can look online. If you looked at some of the plots that they were like the original episodes, they actually, as you say, developed quite a bit, script ideas
Yes.
and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I haven't looked at them for a while, but yes,
I
I
mean,
have seen those.
I looked there on, you can find them on Wikipedia and I think maybe on Memory Alpha. They're kind of not fully impressive in the sense that some of them look interesting. Like there's one about where they were going to go to the Klingon homeworld and all that kind of stuff, which sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But there's one in which Kirk gets transported back in time to the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it sounds like a
Right.
redux of City on the Edge of Forever, where he falls in love with somebody else in the past. Like, come on, man, come on. But
Yeah, so put that on his space Tinder profile,
that's right.
that,
Inevitably falls
warning,
in love.
warning, you will travel back in time and with me and fall in love.
So anyway, I mean, I in looking at some of the production stuff that they had developed, again, some of it was interesting, but you have to wonder, especially given how tenuous TV was at the time. If you didn't get the ratings, you got canceled. And a fourth network, which is again something well outside the scope of understanding, maybe of say my children who barely understand that there are TV channels, let alone networks, and
Right.
what all that meant. And my kids are adults, so it's the odds that this might have killed Star Trek, I think, are pretty high, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that the script ideas seemed like some of the cringe-worthy episodes of the original series. So yeah, just kind of like hitting those notes again really hard, especially again during the 70s when budgets were really thin.
Yes.
And you wouldn't have had it, the good lighting, the good casting, the good costumes, the special effects. It would have been Star Trek shot in a Ramada Inn in Barstow.
Where Kirk would fall in love with someone from the past who was staying at the Ramada Inn.
That's right. There you go.
Yeah. So now, it's worth pointing out that some of the sets that were designed and were constructed became sets in the motion picture,
Hmm.
and the refit of the Enterprise, that model, started off as the Phase Two Enterprise, with the non-cylindrical but the more elongated nacelles and some of the
Yeah,
struts being different.
the refit,
The refit, which they ended
which
up building a whole new model for later. But go ahead.
yeah, I heard the whole new model, by the way, since we're doing trivia here, was so big and so heavy that it took 8 people to move it around.
Yes, I was in fact reading something about the filming of the Wrath of Khan, which we'll talk about in the next
Yeah,
episode. And it required a forklift to move the thing around,
yeah,
and the Reliant model was much more easy to move.
right,
But yeah, it's sort of it is striking when you realize how far we've come from. And I think it's good model work in these movies to everything's being CGI now. It's a whole different
right.
ballgame. I mean, a bit of trivia, and I think it may have been for Planet of the Titans. Because it wasn't for Phase Two. When they were talking about doing this TV movie, there was a whole different design of the Enterprise, which people may have seen. It's often credited to Ralph McQuarrie, who worked on Star Wars, but apparently there was another artist that designed it. But a much more flattened secondary hull. In fact, it's the design that ends up being more or less used for Discovery many, many,
Right.
many, many years later. Anyway, so um, any so it's sort of noteworthy. I think it's interesting from a historical point of view that there, while it felt like there was no Star Trek going on if you were a kid in the 1970s, as I was, but there was all this stuff going on in the background, right?
Right.
And a lot more interest in reviving the show than seemed to be the case at the time. And of course, Star Wars comes out, and then the studios realize, hey, there's going to be made these space things,
Hmm.
and
The kids
this
love their space things.
that's right. So this then translates into Paramount deciding to scuttle the TV show and move into Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Um, the other thing that struck me in looking at some of its past is it really is an early example of what we really are steeped in right now, which is studios knowing they have an IP and trying to figure out how to best exploit that
Hmm.
IP, right?
Hmm.
And in ways that used to not be the case. Anyway, any other thoughts about Star Trek in the Wilderness before we talk about TMP?
No, no. I just eager to talk about where we were ourselves at this time before
Yes.
TMP came out.
So yeah, so this is I think when our age differentials definitely come into play, as I recall. So I was 11 when this movie came out, and I remember going to the theater to see it. As I think I described in an earlier episode, it was um, the only time I can remember my father, my mother, and my younger sister going to the movies together. Not because my parents didn't like movies, we just didn't go to the movies. And we had to have left my twin brother and sister, hello, Philip, I know you're listening, at home because this movie came out on Pearl Harbor Day in 1979.
Hmm.
And I remember it being the winter, but I'm guessing my father's birthday is 2 days later, so maybe we went for my father's birthday or something, or that was the excuse to go to the movies. So I remember sitting in the theater watching this film. Um, and I think I was happy it was Star Trek. I don't remember being super impressed with the movie itself. And being 11 years old, it was a slow film. How about
Yeah.
yourself?
Well, just to kind of rewind even further back in time. So after the animated series wrapped up, I was certainly assuming that was it for Star Trek at
Right?
that point. It didn't seem like that was much of a launch pad for future Star Trek at a Saturday morning cartoon. And I wasn't aware, as we said, about anything going on with Phase Two. So I was pretty excited when I heard that the motion picture was coming out. It seemed like then there might be hope for Star Trek's future, but I hadn't expected. It was a really pleasant surprise. A big surprise was Robert Wise as the director.
Yes.
I was old enough to realize that Robert Wise was a well-established director who had done a lot of top-notch movies, Sound of Music, for geeks like us, The Day the Earth Stood Still, which I was a big fan of at that time. The Haunting, another good geek movie. So that was terrific to hear that. And I actually got wind of a casting call that I didn't attend, and this was maybe one of the worst decisions of my life. And I've made some bad decisions, but this tops it all. And it was that if the scene in the movie where Kirk is telling the crew about
Right,
V'ger, right?
right.
They wanted extras for that to dress up in costume and just be part of the crowd. And I could have done that. Um, I would certainly would have had to trim my very 70s hair for very bushy hair that I had at the time, probably for that. But that would have been a small sacrifice. I don't remember why I didn't do it, but anyway. So it seemed like things were rolling along, a year or so before the movie finally came out, and I was in line for the movie theater to see it on opening day, as one did during that era. Kind of again the post Jaws, post Star Wars experience of when you went to a movie that you really liked and was likely to be very popular, that you wound up in a line.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Um, I mean, your point about Robert Wise, I think, is an important one. I do remember. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I think I knew the Sound of Music. That was kind of all I knew at the time. Um, but I think I was aware that he was a quote unquote real director, not just
Yes,
some rando, and that there was this air of seriousness about the movie, right?
right.
In fact, maybe too serious with a capital S.
Yes, we'll get to all the seriousness soon, I'm
But I
sure.
think that, that was, I mean, I think that Robert Wise was part of this. I think the fact that they had their entirely new orchestral score to the movie was part of this. And I love Jerry Goldsmith's music, but I did
Hmm.
kind of miss the Star Trek theme.
Yeah,
Um, but I think that's also echoing or aping to some degree, excuse me, John Williams's work on all the, because that was the thing, right? You had to have a massive orchestral score. Star Wars, uh, Close Encounters, all these movies had that kind of huge soundtrack, and I was really into soundtracks at the time. So this
yeah,
was, but again, it was just clearly supposed to be a more serious enterprise. No pun
yeah,
intended.
yeah. And also too, I want to mention the poster.
Yes,
So a lot of the ways that we used to anticipate movies was through the poster.
that's right.
And that was the medium that was intended to artistically convey really what the movie was about. And the Star Trek the motion picture poster had a big central, painting of the new Enterprise,
Hmm.
which seemed to combine both the familiar and new.
Yes.
And a movie that then played on both the familiar and new seemed like a very exciting prospect.
Yes, and it featured the three characters on the poster. At least one of the main posters did. It
Yeah,
was Kirk, Spock, and Ilea. So it was like again the old and the new.
yeah. I
Um,
was thinking about the poster where the Enterprise was sort of tilted.
yeah, I
You
think
remember that one?
yes, I do,
Yeah,
and I feel like one's a version of the other one.
yeah, kind of.
Um,
Not the rainbow one.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm thinking of the rainbow one, which is the one that
yeah.
that I personally remember seeing.
Well, it
It,
looked
it,
so that the poster looked like a lot of science fiction art that was on book covers at the time. So
yes,
had sort of a little bit of vibe of Vincent DeFate or some of the other artists who did book covers that had spaceships on them. So again, more to the seriousness, right? That you
oh, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a big picture of the Enterprise.
Yeah, big. It's the whole poster practically
Yeah,
is
and
the
they
Enterprise coming at
show
you.
all the main characters at the bottom, except ironically without Ilea.
Yeah.
Decker's on there, but the rest of the Star Trek crew is on it. I remember the one that when you say if you say Star Trek the motion picture poster, I think of the one with the rainbow effect,
Yeah.
smaller Enterprise, a new logo, and the three characters in the rainbow effect. Um, but yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I know you're right. Now that you mention it, because yeah, you're right. You would be at the theater, you go to see a movie, and there'd be all these posters in the lobby of movies that were coming.
Right.
And sometimes that's the only way you knew the movie was coming, and it would say what date it was coming out and whatever else. It was a whole different, pretty simple marketing back in the day compared to now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, very quick. It's not hard to summarize the movie, and then then when I kind of go through some of the scenes and talk about some of the themes and our impressions of
Right.
them. But I mean, the movie's pretty straightforward. It is there's a big scary cloud coming toward Earth that
Oh.
yeah, that's there you go. It blows up some Klingons. It blows up a Federation
Yeah.
base, or actually sort of fries them, makes them disappear. The crew kind of gets reunited. Although most of the crew is already on the ship, Kirk is an admiral, but he gets command back. Spock has a vision that makes him, or telepathic contact that makes him want to join back up, and they all sort of fly into the cloud and then fly around in the cloud for quite a while
Mhm.
before discovering that, spoilers for a movie from 1979, that V'ger is actually a contraction of Voyager, Voyager 6 being a probe sent by NASA, at least a fictional one, because there were only two Voyager probes, if memory serves, that has been made into a living machine by some planet of machines and wants to come back and merge with the Creator, which, anybody who's a Star Trek fan knows sounds an awful lot like the plot of The Changeling, where the Nomad probe merges with an alien probe, Tanru, if memory serves, that in order to
Wow.
come back and, yes, merge with the creator Jackson Roy Kirk, who he mistakes Kirk for because, machines and names.
Right.
Um, and but is a similarly destructive force that wants to go back to Earth and sterilize. Lots of sterilizing going on. Anyway, I mean, am I missing anything major from the plot that you wanted to point out before we go through the movie?
That's about it. It's a pretty thin plot.
It is a very thin plot.
Yeah. And well, anyway, let's go into the details of it. I'll just say that at the time, I was not in love with this movie when I saw it.
No, I will say from the beginning, no. For the longest time I just thought this movie was boring, and it is boring in many ways. The pacing is not great. It was famously so focused on the special effects that they way overpaid for that they felt like they had to show lots of them in the show. I mean, some of it's interesting, but it just goes on too long, which we'll get to in a second. Um, but it starts off pretty excitingly, though. You start off with this cloud and three Klingon battle cruisers with, at the time, remarkably different Klingons. What was your response to seeing these Klingons, Tom?
I thought it was great. I mean, I had no problems with the Klingons being different. And again, it was kind of like this expectation of a combination of the familiar and the new. And that was a terrific scene. It was visually striking.
Yes.
There was the shot where the one Klingon D7 cruiser
Hmm.
is coming at you, and then the camera is just over it, and it kind of
Yes.
twists around in this kind of clever way, and then you can see the ship going off. That there were all these little touches there. The bridge was incredibly cool to look at.
Yes.
Seeing a bridge that wasn't a hastily slapped together, you know, set for the TV show when they had to show an alien bridge, but something that somebody obviously put a lot of thought into. The Klingons were speaking in a Klingon language. I thought it was terrific.
No, I agree. I was never upset about the fact that Klingons look differently. And it's really, I think, it was striking to me in rewatching it. While a lot of it is still, for lack of a better term, in rough draft form, that scene sets the visual language of Klingons,
Yes,
including the bridge,
right.
which doesn't remain exactly the same, but like that, there are these two supports that kind of come in at angles. That's often the case, even like TNG or other examples. It just the lighting, the color schemes, that's still in many ways what Klingons are portrayed as, what that was sort of interesting. And they have their ridges and whatnot, which do develop. They're not quite as, I'm not quite sure what the word is. They're kind of extreme. And then there's one
Yeah.
guy, sort of the second in command guy, whose head seems too small for him for being a
Hmm.
Klingon, and he has very
Yes.
strange facial hair. But hey,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Having just rewatched it.
but no, it's a great scene. The music's fantastic. It is exciting,
And then the
and
rest of
as
the movie happened.
and then the rest of the movie happened. This is for as a kid, right? I was just excited to see more than one ship on screen at the same time.
Yeah.
Because
That's a really good point.
in
Yes.
TV, it's like, oh, there's one.
Hmm. Right.
Because we can't afford to have more than one, or if there is more than one, it's an obvious just a duplication, like there's in the Ultimate Computer when they fight those they have the war games and the Enterprises versus
Hmm.
four ships, and there's these scenes of just like the Enterprise duplicated four times in the
Yeah.
in the screen. But this was like, this is cool. I that was maybe this is the best scene of the movie, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Um,
I assume you watched the director's cut too.
I did, which I think is, I don't know if you can find the other one or not. This is the one that's on Paramount
I
Plus.
so I seem to remember that the original Klingon fight that V'ger wipes out all three ships one by one, and you see them all. And in this, it kind of jarred me a little bit. Sounds really, I'm sure to people listening to
Right.
this, really incredibly geeky. But the reason I'm bringing
We
it
are
up
ancient
is
geeks, Tom.
brought it up is by not showing all three of them knocked off one by one, it kind of diminished the impact of the scene because
Mhm.
part of the tension was, all right, well, here goes the first one. Oh no, here comes the second one, and the one that's the point of view for the scene with the Klingon commander on it.
Mhm.
What's going to happen with them? It just having two of them get nuked was not as exciting. And I don't know why the whoever did the director's cut made that change, if I'm remembering it
Yeah,
correctly.
I've seen the original, but it's been so long that you could convince me you're right, or that could
Yeah,
be
because it is the best scene in the movie
it is, yeah.
by far.
Um, and of course, this is well-known trivia, but the Klingon commander is played by Mark Leonard, so
I know.
who was also,
Who's
Sarek and various other things.
Yeah, so he played a Vulcan, a Romulan, and a Klingon in his career.
Exactly, exactly. I also thought the photon torpedoes were totally cool as compared
Oh
to
yeah,
when I was a
yeah.
kid in particular. And another trivia bit, on Epsilon 9, the commander who is in charge, that's the guy that was going to play Zahn in Phase 2.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
Yep.
okay. Interesting.
So then we switched to Vulcan, and what I call Shaggy Spock. Um, I do know that scene that scene definitely
Shaggy
has
spot.
Shaggy Spock. It was the 70s after all, but maybe he wouldn't have had to jump in
Golly,
there.
Scoop.
That's not logical. Um, um, some of the visuals in the background were enhanced. I know that
Yes.
in the director's cut. Um, Again, it was nice to see their own Vulcan language.
Hmm.
Although when you listen to it, it's like they didn't try really hard. Like the Vulcan word for logic apparently is logika or something like that. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, but that's okay. It was nice to see more Vulcans and Vulcan things going. It always feels very cold when she just drops the necklace on the ground. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
That was an
um,
odd gesture. Like,
yeah.
don't like. Do you have like an endless supply of these? Are they somewhat valuable to
That's
just kind of
right.
just drop it there just to be a jerk to Spock? I don't know.
So, and this is, I'll go ahead and put this marker down. I know we'll probably talk about it. We will talk about it toward the end. I The story of Spock and V'ger calling to him or encountering this intelligence and this being a driving
Hmm.
force is a good example to me of there's a kernel of an idea here that is not well developed enough in this movie.
Right.
Um,
And what there is in this movie, as we'll talk about, doesn't carry over later.
I agree, but I slightly disagree. I want to talk about that. I have thoughts
Okay.
about that.
Yeah, I thought you might.
But I never understood why, of all the people in all the universe and all the gin joints and all the land on
Yeah.
Shakar, why is Spock the one getting this message? That part never made any sense to me at all. It
Because
still
plot.
doesn't. Well, yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, exactly,
Yeah, they did.
exactly.
They didn't bother to say, well, is because of his hybrid nature that he was sensitive to this. They didn't even bother to explain it. It was
No,
just
no, it was just
dong. Yeah. I'm going to
exactly.
overplay that joke by the end
Uh,
of this
it's okay.
episode.
I'm sure the listeners will enjoy. So we go to Star Trek headquarters, which is cool because again, we see Earth for the first time in the 23rd century. Again, as a kid, I thought
Hmm.
this was exciting,
Yeah.
and also sets the visual language for Starfleet Command going forward. And we get Kirk and all of his Kirkiness. The beginning here, although we start, let's talk about the uniforms for a minute, and maybe the PJ uniforms never did it for me.
They're
The
terrible.
the gray ones, they're just awful.
And there are endless variants of them.
Yes,
Like
there are.
rewatching, I was surprised. Like how many times did they change their uniforms and why? Like Kirk starts out with the with supposedly like the admiral uniform,
Yeah,
the gray and white one,
I
and
kind of like that one.
yeah, that was fine, you know. But then they have the jackets and they
Yes.
have the
Well,
pastel ones, and
yeah,
what the
yeah.
heck was going on there?
They have the short sleeves with the V-necks because again, it's the 70s.
Right.
And then they've got, but I don't know if I never ever noticed before. There's two versions of the gray one. There's one where
Yes.
they have no rank insignia on their sleeves, and they have kind of like an elastic sleeve at the very end, like when
Right.
Decker is first seen on engineering when Kirk shows up to take command. That's what he's
Right.
wearing. And then Kirk's wearing it later toward the end of end of the movie for reasons I don't understand. But
Right.
yeah, like when did you even have time to make all these changes? This movie takes place in the scope of like a day or
Right.
less.
So again, it's just like with the special effects,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's made me feel, and I remember this at the time, it made me feel like the people making this movie are focused on the wrong things,
Yes, yes,
on very
yes, yes.
cosmetic things.
Yeah, I agree. I have a well, I have a thought, and this is a cliffhanger for the listeners because I'm going to wait and talk about this toward the end of Star Trek: To the Wrath of Khan. But I this hits a theme that I realized. What is it that makes these two movies so different? And it's partially about where the focus is, and it's in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had read that they didn't want to use the TOS uniforms or a variation thereof because they'd be too distracting on the big screen. Those colors. I'm like, please distract me because I would prefer
Uh,
to have seen them. I mean,
well, these
I
didn't
always
look.
thought.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I thought I was very pleased when they brought them back for the J.J. Abrams movies. I thought they looked
Hmm.
great,
Yeah.
and they were slightly updated, but they weren't. And I like they look great on Strange New Worlds, but it's just not good.
Well, they don't look like uniforms.
No.
They look like if you watched, as we did, like TV movies from the 70s that were
Yes.
science fiction based, like Roddenberry's Pilots That Didn't Go Anywhere.
Right.
Like there was one where John Saxon wakes up in the future and everyone's wearing those sorts of pajama-like
I
outfits.
know.
It was sort of a convention at the time in the 60s and 70s. You know, you'd
Yeah.
have
There's no.
these skin tight
Oh yeah.
unitards that people would be wearing, and it didn't work on the big screen. Who thought that was a good idea?
It reminded me of Space 1999
Right.
in terms of the color palette and yeah, you mentioned skin tight. I mean, this is a family podcast, but good Lord, guys.
Yeah, especially
And,
the enhancing the resolution of the
yes,
movie for the director's cut.
and then
There's some bulges I didn't need to see
that
emphasized even
exactly
further.
correct. And those belt buckle things, which I think in which are never explained in the movie, but apparently they're supposed to be like medical sur monitoring devices for the
Oh,
crew,
okay.
but they look ridiculous. And it's a weird, again, the 70s, like, we don't want to see the belt. The belt's like in the uniform. Like,
Right.
what's going on? Yeah, they were not good. They were not
Right, because
good.
it attracts the eye also,
Yes, it does.
family podcast,
That's right.
also to a region of the body that
That's right.
is not, again, focusing on the wrong things. That's the theme of this episode.
That's right. Yes, it is. So, to get back to some, Kirk talks to Sonak, who's going to be the new science officer because Kirk has I mean, thing about Vulcan science officers, weirdly enough. But it's this is the beginning of, Kirk is just an arrogant jerk in this movie.
Yes.
And I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell Nagura, and this is the way it's going to be. And again, there's a version of that story that's an interesting story, but it's not in this movie.
Right.
Um, uh, and he goes, just to skip ahead a little bit. We go to the Enterprise, but let's talk about one. It's kind of funny to me because if you watch Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan as many times as I have, I see all of the reused footage. It just clicks in my head.
Right.
And rather than saying that Regular One is the upside down version of the space office station, I think of the other way around. Like, oh, look, there's Regular One
Yes.
upside down.
Yes, exactly.
But you want to talk about the flyby for a minute? So they go up in the space and they're in the little pod and Scotty's flying them around the Enterprise and oh my goodness.
Well, when I was watching this the first time in the theater, this is where I felt like the wheels are coming off.
Okay.
That this movie may be bad because it goes on forever. So
It goes on and on forever.
so for those who haven't seen it, bless you.
Yes.
Stay in that happy state, unless you're a Star Trek purist. But
Yes.
Kirk is going to the Enterprise, and we see the little shuttle pod or whatever it is, maintenance
Hmm.
pod, fly around it very slowly with Kirk and Scotty with these rapt expressions on their faces.
Yes.
And yes, I love the Enterprise and
Yes.
I like the new design, but
Yes.
what the hell was that supposed to convey? And it took me out of the movie like so many times. Special
Yeah.
effects heavy moments like this just took me out of the movie. It's like, okay, come on, man. There's a
I
story to be told here. I like what I'm seeing, but I'm not, but you're kind of insulting me by
yeah.
throwing too much eye candy at me.
So I mean I could see a point by which okay, Kirk is seeing this ship, although one of the things that doesn't really make any sense is that he's like high up in Starfleet, so like hasn't, and it's in the orbit of Earth. It's not like you can't get to it.
Right.
He hasn't
Exactly.
seen this before. Um,
Yeah.
and it's almost it's this
That's a really
weird.
good point. Yeah.
It's supposed to be like our introduction to the new ship, which is fine, and I don't mind a good flyby, but holy cow! Just on the one side of the ship, they kept like going back and forth to the pod, and they were showing the ship, and they would go back to the pod and show the ship, and it's like, are we not making any progress at all? And what
Yeah.
really struck me is there are a couple of times where they show pieces of space dock, not even the ship,
Right.
like the lights or like part of the. It's like, what are you? This is like you were clearly trying to fill out this space, and it
Yeah.
was totally as you gratuitous and unnecessary, and just you know,
Yeah, and my
she's a
my reaction to this on the rewatch, not at the time, was this the first blatant fan service by the Star Trek franchise? Right? Like they expected that just, following, Kirk and Scotty around the ship was something that the fans were going to enjoy just for its own sake. Oh, look, the Enterprise, it's pretty. Let's spend 5 minutes flying around it.
maybe. I can see your point to that. It just feels to me just like filler.
Yeah,
Because
that could be too.
you could fly around the ship and be a little too loving about it.
Yeah, but expensive filler.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, again, I don't know if this is true. This is the thing I have thought for years. I feel like I read it at the time, or not long after. Is that they had spent so much money on this stuff, they'd already done the spending, so they had to put it on screen.
Right. Well, and here's the thing about special effects that the more you have them dominate the picture,
Yes,
the more you're going to see the seams and the warts
yes,
and the things
yes.
that don't quite work. Like look with the movie Alien. In Alien, the you don't see the alien very much. And if you'd seen more of him, the big tall guy in the rubber suit and so
Right.
forth, it would have diminished the effect. Um, Here, like in the flyby, it goes on for so long. I was looking at like the little maintenance pod that they're flying in. It's like, well, the way they've superimposed Kirk and Scotty there in the
Yeah,
window
yeah, it doesn't look good.
doesn't look good, right? Which would have been like a momentary blip if it
Right.
hadn't been however many minutes of this flyby and you kept cutting back to them and you kept seeing the shot that
Yes,
didn't work.
that's right. That's right. So Kirk finally, after 45 minutes of flying around the ship,
Yeah. He
he
has a
finally
cigarette.
he finally talks. That's right. That's exactly right. Um, uh, yeah. Um, so we get into the Enterprise, and the Enterprise is a mess, right? It's kind of
Right.
shocking. I know they're trying to. Again, this is an idea, which is the ship is new and refitted, and it's also kind of hard. This is being a total nerd about it, but or geek. It's hard now to think, oh, this is the only ship in the solar system at this point in
Right.
time. It doesn't
Right.
make any. It makes no sense. But okay, fine. We accept it. It's a common trope in Star Trek, which will actually happen in the next
Mhm.
movie as well. That it's the only
Yeah.
one in the area. Um, but but the mess is it's too much of a mess. It's too much of a mess,
Yes.
right? Um, and this is really where Kirk as a jerk really starts because he's a total ass to
Hmm.
Decker, a total ass. It's not
Right.
necessary. I also don't understand why he has to be broken down in rank. He can still be a captain and not be, and Kirk can still be an admiral and be in charge. That's the way rank works, but whatever.
Right.
Um, but I mean, the whole scene is just not good. And Decker's right. Kirk's just looking for an excuse to get command back, and it's not really even necessary for the moment. I mean, in fact, really, Decker could be in command and Kirk could just be an advisor. It doesn't have to be
Right.
any of this stuff. What are your thoughts about that scene and whatnot?
Oh, he was a jerk. Kirk was a jerk. And it doesn't stop. It
No,
was
it doesn't
another. It,
stop.
it doesn't stop, and it just they spend so much time with him in this movie, and just to forgive me for jumping ahead a little
No,
bit,
go right ahead. It's
it,
fine.
it's not just that he's filling the captain's chair of the Enterprise.
Right.
It's like he has to be there to do everything.
Yes,
Like
that's
he
right.
has to operate the transporter. He has to recover Spock later on, when he's
Yes, that's right.
in outside the ship. It's like they threw Kirk into the middle of everything in a really kind of unnecessary way, and then made him a completely unlikable person.
That's right. Well, I mean, let's talk about the transporter, which happens not long thereafter, right?
Yeah,
It is. That's part of why I think why I say the ship is such a mess. How can we even end up in a place where the ship is operational? The transporter doesn't work, which should be pretty standard equipment at this point in time, because
right,
of one component in engineering that goes bad. And I mean, let's face facts. If in fact it was the case that the technology was not ready to go, Kirk's responsible for those people dying because he
right.
insists this is
Yeah,
what we're
the
going to have to do.
transporter's not ready. They get horribly, horribly uh, reconstituted.
Yes,
We see a glimpse of what sort of puddle of flesh that they've turned
yes,
into before they're zapped back to Earth. And he's completely responsible for it. It doesn't feel bad about
absolutely.
it.
No, no. Um, and that was, I do remember as an 11-year-old, that was a shocking scene to me.
That was, I mean, that was a
Um,
kind of body horror I did not
yes,
expect. We didn't call it
exactly.
body horror at the time, but ooh.
Yeah, it was gross.
And
But
again,
yeah,
why was it there?
yeah.
How did that advance the story?
Again, it's this idea that the ship isn't quite ready, so we're going to show you how the ship isn't ready in a pretty kind of, again, unnecessary way. And in a way also that upon rewatching the movie, the fact that they're transporting more people on within an hour, however long it wasn't long at all in the
Hmm.
scope of the film. Oh, well, it's all working now. We replaced the component. Like this one component can go bad, and this is
Yeah,
this is not a very good system,
that's
guys.
right. I'm
Um,
kind of on McCoy's side now about the
exactly.
transporter.
I will say, but before we get to McCoy, there is a scene where, and let's talk about her for a moment. When Ilea comes on board, which is very reminiscent of not it echoes, or it's a future echo of what happens in TNG when Riker and Troy encounter one another. It's
Hmm.
because in TNG and Encounter at Farpoint, Riker's on the bridge and Troy comes in the turbo lift and they have this interchange. It's reminded me of that very directly. Roddenberry I guess plagiarizing himself later.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this whole oath of celibacy thing.
That's right. Well, we've both read what was behind that, but it's
Yes,
not. But since this is a podcast about our reactions at the time,
yes.
that was just what the hell was that moment?
Oh, I had to find out what celibacy was because I'm like, I don't know what that
Oh,
means.
you didn't know? Oh, that's
I was
great.
11 years old. Who
That's
would ever,
right.
ever the word celibacy come up?
Did you ask your mom?
I think I asked my mom. I do not
Okay.
remember the exact answer that I got. I mean, I think I got a
Yes.
fairly straightforward answer, but
Right.
um,
Well, son, it's the thing that you're going to be pursuing until you meet the right woman and get
that's right.
married.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was holy cow. But this weird, yeah. And I will. I need to post that essay that we read, and I do remember reading the novelization that Roddenberry wrote. And I do remember some of the stuff being more forward than in the movie. But this whole
Yeah.
idea that like they're just so damn sexy that if they have sex with non-Deltans, it'll like kill them or whatever. I'm like, this is
Yeah, there's succubi and incubi.
so weird, so strange. And just I don't know. It felt like, and again, this is I keep coming back to this. It's like there's an idea here as if just having a weird fact about an alien race is world building, right? It's
Right.
because it really, like, what does this even mean?
Well, I actually thought it was a joke at the time. Like you had to shut down Kirk right away, like, because we'd seen his libido rampage across, dozens of episodes of the original series. Like whenever there was a female guest star, out came the libido. That's what I thought it was at the time. I
That's funny. I'm sorry, Captain. I have an oath of celibacy on file, so
Let's
it was
just get
just
this out
really.
of the way.
Um, but I mean, the funny thing is that's the only thing we know about Deltans from this movie is they're bald. Apparently, at least this one's bald.
Yeah.
They occasionally wear headdresses, and they're just so damn sexy. It's just, it's
Right.
so it's not much of an alien race, shall we say?
No.
And
So why introduce them?
exactly, exactly. It just, I don't know, bizarre.
I know
Um,
they have to walk around saying, "I'm not sleeping with you. I'm not
that's
sleeping with you," and
that's
really, especially not you.
that's right. That's right. So let's talk about the best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Is McCoy beaming onto the Enterprise,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That's the best
Well,
scene in the whole movie.
second best after the
Okay.
Klingons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair,
Yeah.
fair
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
It's the best. It's the McCoy. I mean, see if you would disagree with this. McCoy is the only character who seems like himself in this movie.
Yes. He seems so relaxed compared to like Shatner's way of playing Kirk in this is this sort
Yes.
of nervous, wound guy
Yes.
that's sort of painful at times to see. Like McCoy's kind of relaxed. Hey, bud, I got a beer now.
That's right. The beer was great. The
Yeah.
beer was great. I love the line about, they drafted me.
Yes.
Um, I did, on the one hand, I liked Kirk because I think he was sincere. He needs him. Again, I think, but the movie itself is failing to some degree in my mind. Instead of really making the human connection, because he says something similar to Spock later, that he needs these guys, which I think is supposed to be a reflection of these characters in this triumvirate that we always talk about with TOS.
Mhm.
But to me, it all came across as just Kirk being selfish. I need you, therefore I
Right.
made you come back to the ship. And I need Spock, I need you to behave the way I need you to behave because I need you, not because you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just Kirk is so super selfish in this movie. It's
I know.
off-putting.
Well, he does kind of need him in the sense that you see McCoy later be a good advisor to him.
Yes.
Kind of say, "Hey, back off. Let your crew do their jobs."
Right.
You could kind of tell that that's an important part of the relationship.
Yes.
But again, it's then emphasizing Kirk as a jerk, right?
Yes.
That he
Yes.
was micromanaging everybody.
Yes.
By the way, I think that other than the unintentionally cringy lines like "My oath of celibacy is on
Yes.
file" in this movie, McCoy has the only good memorable line at the end of this scene about engineers, they like to change everything.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a good line. Yes. Um, And I'll point out just in passing, they leave space dock, and we get another freaking
I
way too
know.
long. In fact, it struck me again, if we're being more parsimonious in our filmmaking, you could have had the hero shot of the hero ship being leaving space dock. It didn't have to be the
Right.
stupid, and even then it was too long. But anyway, Spock arrives. Again, it's kind of funny. I think again to the point of the money situation, having too much money to do whatever they wanted to do, and paying
Right.
too much for special effects. Like Star Trek has transporters, except for when it melts people, apparently. But I
Hmm.
mean, why do we have to have the shuttle do a whole pirouette and then do the space dock thing? And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's just space porn.
Yes, yes, yes,
You know,
yes,
well, space porn usually means like looking at the Webb telescope pictures and saying, "Oh my God, that's amazing." Here, it's
yes,
just, how long can we linger on this new spaceship and watch the
yes.
pod that's carrying him, kind of somersault its way over to the Enterprise. It's just so boring. It's just so boring.
I've committed a sin though, Tom. I skipped the wormhole scene. Your favorite scene in the movie.
Oh my God, yes, the wormhole scene.
Because before Spock shows up, they go to warp.
Okay.
Even though, again, the ship is not capable of going to warp, possibly, but we're going to go
Right.
stop this creature. Okay, fine.
Right. So Kirk has said, I only jeopardized two people with the transporter. Now
That's
I'll
right.
jeopardize everybody.
Exactly. So everyone's telling him, Decker's telling him, Scotty's telling him, we're not ready to go to warp. We're going to warp anyway. Okay, fine. So then they end up in this wormhole, which is, I didn't know that was a thing, but that's fine.
No.
And then where time slows down. And
Yeah.
then there is an asteroid for some reason in the middle of the wormhole they're going to hit. And then
That
Kirk
was really
orders,
weird.
it made no sense. But I mean, what do I know about wormholes?
Okay.
But still, I don't know. There's no maneuvering. They can't do anything. And there's also not really, for all the special effects in this movie and all the money they spent on visual effects, this scene is just slowing down the video with like streaky things going on. And Kirk orders the phasers, and you can do your line if you like.
All
Because
right.
then
So
Decker hops up and says, "What?"
it's Chekhov who says the line I'm going to say, which is
Oh,
torpedo. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was just saying. I haven't gotten
well,
there. Belay
yes,
that
phaser order, whatever.
order. Because we haven't
Photon
had,
torpedo.
it's not like we've had a lot of slow scenes already. We have to
No,
have
no.
one where they
I mean,
deliberately slow
really,
it all
it's
down.
pretty amazing if you think about it. Like this
Right.
is
So, by the way, this segment is dedicated to my friend Scott, who knows he can make me laugh by doing either that line or the other line from this scene.
so they fire the photon torpedo and it blows up, and everything's fine. Then again, torpedo
Torpedoes
away.
away! And I may have laughed out loud in the theater when that happened. It was just so ludicrous.
It yeah. Anyway,
And
it's
also like the shaking is so
yes, the shaking.
dopey. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just again, it was a scene that was supposed to illustrate how the ship is not really fully functional. But after this scene, if memory serves, everything's cool.
That's right. It just like boom,
Everything's
everything's
fine
fine.
now. No
Yeah.
problems. I mean, there are wires and things hanging out when he first arrives, which again
Yeah.
is an hour or two before this happens. I don't know. I feel like V'ger's like 23 hours away from Earth when they get on the ship or something like that.
Right.
So it's not like a whole lot of time is passing. Now, there's plenty of time, as you point out, for many, many costume changes for no particularly good reason.
Right.
But the ship is now it's all fine. Well,
Yeah.
because Spock
So
shows up, and that's right. When Spock shows up, he has
after that, yeah.
after that he has some formula to fix the matter, antimatter, whatever the hell, and technobabble, and that solves the problem
Right.
because Spock is smart. But here's
But
a
again,
question.
no, hang on before you
No,
get to
no, go
that.
ahead. No, no,
But
no.
this is again where Kirk does something horrible and
Yes.
then nobody calls him
No.
on it and he
Agreed.
doesn't doubt himself. So like in the next movie, there's the scene where
Yes.
Savick quotes a
Yes.
regulation to Kirk, which he then doesn't follow, and terrible things happen.
Yes.
And then he
Yes.
says
Yes.
to her, "You keep quoting
That's
regulations
right.
at me."
No,
Right? There's no accounting like that.
that's a
Like he could have taken McCoy aside and say, "Man, I really need you here because
oh, worse, worse.
you keep my head screwed on right."
He takes Decker in private and berates him
Exactly. Yes.
for belaying the order without even asking, well, why did you do that? And Decker has to tell him that because of the way they redesigned the phasers, that the phasers wouldn't have worked because of the warp engines were out of alignment or whatever it was.
Mhm.
And it's still like, and Kirk kind of begrudgingly says, well, oh, I guess, no, okay. And Decker is the one that has to say that he saved the ship, basically.
Right.
Or I guess Kirk says it, but Decker says, I know, or something. It's a really, again, Kirk's not learning anything. And I agree with you. There's some clear thematic comps to Wrath of Khan, and
Mhm.
one of them is and that scene you're talking about, and I made a note about it myself, and we'll, for discussion as well. The Kirk's arrogance in this movie is never a doesn't fully make sense, and it doesn't even seem it seems born of insecurity, not of overconfidence and
Right.
from like his experiences.
Oh, that's a great
Like,
point.
you know what I mean? It just he
Yeah.
feels like that. There's that scene earlier in our recount here after I think it's after the transporter room thing, and he gets lost in the hallway trying to find the turbo lift.
Hmm.
And he just looks lost. But he asks for help, but then Decker sees him asking for help, and there's this awkward sort of, see, you don't know what you're doing look to
Hmm.
it. But
Right.
but Kirk doesn't seem to learn or like soften or like, okay, maybe I need your help. It's just, he kind of plays it off, and then that leads into this scene with the wormhole thing. Like he's not
Right.
learning that he doesn't know everything. Of course, by the same token,
Yeah.
I don't understand how Chief of Starfleet Operations doesn't know some of these basic things. Like, wouldn't he know that they've redesigned the phasers that they draw power from the warp core? That seems like something he would know.
Yeah, you wouldn't put, incompetent people in positions of great responsibility, would you?
Oh, that never happens. But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah. So you know what I realized? So remember back in the original series, often the foil for Kirk was some sort of Federation High Commissioner
yes,
or
yes,
yeah,
yes, yes,
anyway, who was a real a-hole. He
yes.
turned into that a-hole.
That's a great point. That's a great point. He really did because it
Yeah.
happened constantly. Every Commodore was an asshole. Every High
Hmm.
Commissioner was a jerk.
Yeah.
And here we have the manifestation of it all. He learned the wrong lessons. So, getting back to Spock,
Hmm.
again, this is like one of these ideas that just didn't work for me as executed. The idea that Spock had almost entirely purged emotion and therefore would behave differently than he did before was a good idea. But I do not understand, and I never have understood, and when I rewatched it, for this discussion, why does logic equal I'm a jerk when I show up, and I
Right.
can't say like I don't know, it's agreeable to see you or something else that a Vulcan might say. He doesn't even answer questions when people talk to him. He just sort of ignores them. It,
Yeah.
it made no sense.
Yeah. I don't know.
Um,
Like if there had been an explanation like he had been traumatized by failing at the Kolinar
yeah,
ritual,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
would have been nice to say, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're right. He is himself a jerk.
Or that he's so locked into these. But again, they don't really explain whatever he's
Right.
receiving from V'ger. I mean, there are ways to make it work, but it makes no sense in context. It just seems to be that the argument is if, and again, it's kind of the argument that's made about V'ger. If you're logical and knowledge based only,
Hmm.
you can't relate to other entities, which I just don't think makes sense.
Right.
But I will say he's the only one that looks even semi good in those uniforms because he has that collar, which makes it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Still not great, but anyway, I'm not quite sure why he has that collar. But anyhow, and there is this scene, as I've already alluded to, where Kirk again says that I need him, we need him. But again, it feels more like a selfishness on Kirk's part than an actual we need him. You know what I
Right.
mean? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. It wasn't clear why they needed him.
Yeah, that was so. Anything else about Spock you want to talk about at this point?
No, I think that covers. I mean, I think that the movie, if it has any sort of character arc, it's around Spock.
It is. That's true.
And if you don't mind, just to talk about it.
No, go right ahead.
So the basic character arc is he's failed at achieving pure logic. He comes to uh, the Enterprise to help. He discovers that V'ger is effectively the ideal that he was pursuing of pure
Hmm.
logic, and he finds out just how arid that is.
Yes.
And it's, a life-changing experience for him. He kind of turns into the regular Spock after that. And I actually thought that like the scene where, he kind of goes off his own and kind of tries to mind meld with V'ger. I mean, that was sort of a Spockish thing to do.
Yes.
Especially if he is again sort of the traumatized Spock.
Yes.
Anyway, I thought that was pretty decent, and I thought that was one of the better parts of the movie was that particular storyline. But then they set it up so that effectively he's had this great conversion where he
Hmm.
realizes, that it's not just that it's unfortunate for you personally to be so devoid of anything other than logic that you're just you become an automaton, but it actually V'ger's this illustration that civilizations, species can't advance without something more than logic. That the whole ending of the movie is about, that V'ger can't advance because it's reached the limits of pure logic. And given that, you'd think in future movies that might matter, but maybe the future movies so wanted to flush this down the memory hole that they didn't want to pick up on that again. I don't know.
Well, several things come to mind. I think again there is an interesting, and maybe if this was the central theme of the movie in a way that was more overt and better developed, it would have been a better movie. Um, of Spock's revelation, which is almost it almost feels tacked on, even though you can draw the
Hmm.
through line, but it really feels kind of tacked on because, like, again, to get ahead of ourselves, which is fine. We don't have to be slaves to the plot here, the plot, the scenes, but he cries for V'ger at the end, which is for especially the Spock that shows up and can't even talk to anybody about anything
Right.
is kind of shocking, and it's in some ways does kind of feel like out of nowhere that the mind meld clearly matters, and he clearly when he's in sickbay later, he almost looks like he's smiling in a way that
Yeah.
so that was an interesting visual. Um, and yeah, the mind meld scene's a good scene. Although it's funny, it reminded me of speaking of TAS from last week. He's like holds his hands out.
That's right.
It's
Yes.
just like the one of the episodes of TAS where he melds with a cloud. And part of this is informed by later stories about Vulcans, right?
Mhm.
Um, but also maybe illustrates the way in which Roddenberry is insufficient to tell a Star Trek story. Because what he seems to be saying in this movie is that Vulcans, especially the highest level of Vulcan, is just pure logic in a machine-like way. But we're told later, and I think even as early as Star Trek 3, if not even in Star Trek 2, I can make an argument. Yeah, I can make an argument in Star Trek 2 that Vulcans have emotions. They just repress them and control them in ways that humans don't,
Right. I thought
right?
that was in the original series too, that
It
there was some
was. I think
explanation of that. Right.
that's the no, there is actually. Now that
Mhm.
so this is not like this seems to be almost a cartoonish version of Vulcan. And the only thing that might make it make sense, there's a reference, and this is even though I've mentioned I'm rewatching Star Trek Enterprise. I don't think I've gotten to this part yet. I feel like there's a reference to like Vulcan logic extremists at some point in Star
Yes.
Trek.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
it would almost make sense that what Spock was doing in this sort of attempt to purge himself from his human side, that he'd
Mhm.
really fallen in with these extremists, that the Kolinar thing is not just, a normal thing people do. Oh, that's also referenced at some point later in Star
Right.
Trek. But it almost feels like this is beyond even a normal Vulcan thing to do. But
Right.
again, it's not well explored in this sense. And the fact that it's sort of broken so much,
Yeah. Also, it'd be like the Mandalorian, like the we find out in the series The Mandalorian that he's actually part of this extremist group,
Yes, that's right.
who never unmask.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, I'll go ahead and say it now. I'm sure we'll come back to it. I would argue my this is headcanon, as they say. I don't know that I have any. There's no like textual sort of proof. Is I always felt like the way Spock behaved in Wrath of Khan, in particular,
Hmm.
because you really don't have him in that to be the case in Star Trek 3. Maybe you can make some arguments about 4, and then 5 is 5. But I felt like his demeanor in Star Trek 2 was reflective of what happened to him in Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Well, that could be.
I thought he was more comfortable. He was not. He was more comfortable being around humans. The gift. I mean, we get to the next movie, but I mean, the gift. He gives the gift in the beginning, and the way he kind of pokes him about letting Savick, take her out, Mr. Savick, and
Right.
clearly poking Kirk in the ribs.
Hmm.
It just he seemed less. He seemed logical and still serene, but comfortable with who he was. That was my
Right.
interpretation.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That may be me
So,
just retconning what they were trying to do.
so yeah, I had another reaction at the time, that, again, because I really didn't like this movie and I started really picking it apart
Right.
as soon as I saw it, was that it doesn't make sense to be purely logical. I mean, if it, almost to the point where, let's say, if you have no emotions at
Yes.
all, then you have no reason for doing anything,
Right.
right? You're just an empty vessel in a way,
Hmm.
and in the original series said it was that, again, that, Vulcan had this savage past. The Vulcans were afflicted with stronger emotions than most species, and so they had to come up with this kind of very restrictive logic discipline, just to prevent themselves from killing each other.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, but that was all under the surface. It wasn't that, and sometimes it would come out like, when, they were in heat
Yes.
with
That's
the
right.
Ponfar, but that it wasn't completely gone. But like, if you don't want anything, then what are you doing with your life, right? What do you like if you don't want to, go to this Vulcanist Science Academy and become the best student there and become the chief scientist studying warp theory or join Starfleet or whatever? There has to be a reason for doing things,
Right. Right.
you know.
A motivation.
Yeah, so it seemed like the Kulinar was a sort of like a weird idea in the first place. Um, and also too, in the original series, they had the mention of IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite
Yes.
combinations. So does it mean then that the Vulcans just that's some sort of just wordplay that they have? They don't really mean it, that they just don't have any respect for people who are not purely logical? I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
I think it's a good point, and I just it just doesn't totally track unless it is a very specific. I mean, I guess even the movie kind of postulates a little bit from just the symbolism that it provides that it's maybe Kolinar is a monastic kind of order.
Right.
But even so, yeah, pure logic. But yeah, you're right. I was just thinking about TOS, right? Your mock time is certainly a great example. If
Hmm.
Ponfar exists as sort of almost a biological imperative for Vulcans, then that's obviously the loss of all. In fact, he says the loss of all logic at that moment in time. So how Kolinar blocks that or not, but uh, this side of paradise where he gets infected by those spores and his
Hmm.
emotions come back, and then Kirk has to sort of goad him into trying to kill him,
Right.
but shows again sort of the
Hmm.
emotions, and then all our yesterdays in the third series where he goes back in time and the machine kind of makes him like he's
Right.
an ancient Vulcan and his passions come back. So yeah, I mean this is not like something that comes later. It happens before, and in some ways this is Roddenberry. I mean, we probably will talk about Roddenberry some here in a minute and going forward. Roddenberry deserves a lot of credit for obviously for helping create or creating the basics for this show, but I'm not sure he's always. Actually, I do know he's not the best really at fully fleshing out these characters and making them and telling good stories about them.
No, no, I agree with that.
I mean, let's we've already kind of touched on some of this stuff, and there's a whole lot of at this point flying around through V'ger, and
Hmm.
again, lots of special effects showing the V'ger cloud. I mean, one thing I will say about it that's a positive. It looks different than anything that I had seen on screen before.
Oh yeah, it's
Uh,
definitely very alien.
and I also like the shots where the Enterprise is very small because it shows the scale of the
Mhm.
thing. But there's just too much of it. um, and
Yeah,
you know,
another slow
oh,
fly
slow.
through with people saying, "Oh my gosh." I mean, I did like what they would say, "I don't know what I'm looking at." It's so alien. I have no idea
Yes,
what it
yes.
is I'm seeing here. I mean, that was pretty good. I like that.
Um, there. So there is the bit where they first probe, where V'ger probes and Chekhov gets hurt, and I guess this is the other part of I wrote down sexual healing for Ilea because she just
Oh, there we
touches him and he like
go.
she's just so damn sexy.
Yeah.
But yeah, they and the fact that Decker didn't want to fly in, like, well, how can you not fly in? Isn't that why you're here?
Yeah, he's also really bad at his job. That
Yes, he
that
is.
really stuck out for me this time too, watching it. Was like, well, you're there. You're just not
What
going
are
to
you
go to the
supposed to
center of the
do?
cloud.
Yeah, yeah, it made no sense.
And also this the playing up the sexiness too much. Her outfit when
Oh
she
yeah,
gets
yeah.
when the robot version of her
So
shows up.
she gets killed, and then she comes back as a probe. I'm pretty sure she's naked at first in the sonic shower. Is she
Yes,
not? I'm not quite sure how the clothes came in. I was.
I don't know, it's hanging right next to the sonic
I
shower.
guess
I
so.
guess
Um,
it's sonic, so they don't get wet.
but she was wet though.
Yes,
I
so it was a
didn't.
real shower. Okay,
But they called it a sonic.
we're
They called it.
imposing the sonic shower.
No, they called it a sonic shower
Oh
in
yes,
the
that's right.
script.
That's right. Yeah.
Because that's then I'm like, well, she's wet, man. And then she's got her little whatevers, and then this is the weird scene. Now, and I will point readers to, and I will post an essay about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, especially about this whole sexuality issue and the novelization in particular as it pertains to whether Kirk should try to seduce the Aelia probe or whether Decker should, which is crazy. But then there's this whole set of scenes. Where they're watching them on TV basically as they tour the ship. It's also slow and poorly timed
Yeah.
and trying to like it's not entirely clear. Well, they try to make it clear why she might have Ilea's memories, but all that was I thought ham-fisted and not didn't make a ton of sense.
Well, it's so they converted her into into digital basically,
Yes, yes.
and they had enough of her in memory to be able to create something that could talk to the carbon units on the Enterprise. But they didn't have her memories or anything. I just
Well,
like
that's my point, right?
right.
Because
So she didn't understand anything.
she clearly still loved the Ilea probe clearly loves Decker still.
Right.
That somehow that which makes no sense if V'ger is a being of pure logic that cannot understand emotion, how could his technology replicate emotion, right? I will somewhat
Right.
skip ahead toward the end when they merge. She's, it really stuck out to me this time. They keep making goo goo eyes at one another,
Yeah.
like somehow Decker knows they can merge, and that'll all be fine. Um, I don't know, but
I
because they
don't
keep
know
looking at
how
one
he
another.
anticipates what that experience is going to be like.
No, but he's. I know I don't have a contract for the next movie, so I might as well merge and get it over with. But
Right.
it's just, but if in fact, as the scene suggests, that V'ger can digitize Ilea's memories, then the machine should have been able to understand a whole lot more than it does.
Yeah.
Then that
So
part's just lame.
yeah. So this is something that really bugged me at the time and now. And it's not limited to Star Trek, the motion picture. It's in other episodes of Star Trek and in science fiction in general. It's that hyper advanced civilizations are really stupid.
Yes.
And in this case, the machine race, builds this juggernaut of destruction and unleashes it on the universe, that just keeps digitizing stuff all over the place. Like they didn't know that was the likely outcome of them, giving an upgrade to the millionth degree to the Voyager probe, and then it gets there, and like the less advanced people of the Enterprise are more able to understand V'ger than V'ger is able to understand them.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and this happens over and over again with these.
And why
You,
why would I'm sorry.
but
Where we
like
going?
like we may not understand like the experience of what it's like to be an
Sure.
ant, but we
Sure.
know things about ants.
Right. Right. That's right. That's right. It shouldn't a hyper intelligent race of machine creatures should understand that there's also carbon-based life in the galaxy.
Right.
And then it's not all just an infestation. Um, in some ways, actually, the Nomad story in the Changeling makes more sense because the idea in that episode of Star Trek, the original series, was that these two, that the Earth probe and the alien probe merged, and then they jumbled their missions and didn't really understand that
Right.
it was a mistake. This is supposed to be a race of beings who are super intelligent and powerful, but they can't understand their other or teach V'ger that there are other kinds of life forms in the universe. It really doesn't make any sense. It's one of those things that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Again, it gets this thing that I keep coming back to, which is um, the notion that there's an idea here. And the idea is, oh, what if this probe comes back and wants to merge with the creator and doesn't understand what it means? It's like almost like a bad Twilight Zone episode where there's a kernel of an idea. And the story really is about the reveal. It's not really about anything else. It's certainly not about the characters, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and here's another stupid thing about V'ger. And forgive me if I'm jumping ahead again too much,
no, no, we're
but
kind of we're getting into the movie as far as I'm concerned. So
right. So V'ger is aware that it has reached its evolutionary dead end.
right,
It's consumed all this information. The information hasn't helped it to advance to whatever the next phase is. Why not just say that?
that's
Right?
right,
Say,
that's right,
just tell everybody, yeah, this is my sole purpose now, is to be able to take the next quantum leap in evolution.
that's
I'm
right.
stuck. I need your help. Right? Why does it all have to be implied? And the Enterprise crew has to figure it out. I
Oh
remember
yeah,
feeling that at the time watching the movie too. There's
the fact
another
where
moment. It's like, oh, come on, guys.
the fact where it has to have the information input directly so we can merge with the creator. It's this.
Right.
I think it's Roddenberry. Roddenberry has a clear obsession with certain elements of religion, even though he is an atheist.
Right.
And he wants to tell this story about this creature that wants to merge with God.
Hmm.
But it doesn't make full sense.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know if it's Roddenberry's attempt to constantly want to make man the center of the universe, humanity, the earth. I don't know, but it's a weird theme that doesn't make total sense.
Right.
And also, if the notion of Star Trek is supposed to be about technology and its capacity to make things better, it's odd that he keeps having these technological things come back to, to
Right.
destroy us until Kirk can talk them out of whatever. Because in some ways, it's another part of this theme of Kirk's and convincing an artificial entity to sawed off, right? I mean, it's
Exactly. Yes. And the other thing about this, again, when I was watching it, I realized this is pretty much borrowed from Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. The notion
okay.
that there are aliens who reach this evolutionary dead end. They can't proceed. I mean, in that book, what the aliens do is that they then help other species out there find a path to eventual, transition to whatever the next phase is. Yeah, so it was ripped off from that, and it just like, okay, come on, man. There, at least they were aware of what they were doing, and again, they were able to tell eventually
Right.
people what they were actually up to. Again, here it's just like V'ger's just sort of thrashing around and not, passive aggressively saying, "Oh, there's a wire here that's busted. I guess somebody
Yes.
has to connect the wires."
Well, and that's something I was going to say a minute ago, and then I got sidetracked. That makes no sense to me, at least in the context of the film, that treating it like a toddler would elicit the responses that it elicits in the film.
Right,
Why would it be the case that at this point, they don't even know that it has they don't know it's Voyager. They don't know it has Earth origins. Why
right.
would treating this super powerful entity like an Earth toddler work? And speaking as someone that had three Earth toddlers, I'm not sure it would work on toddlers, to be totally honest.
Yes.
But it was just a strange, I don't know, strange notion, in my opinion. Anyway, anything else about the movie in general before we talk about our maybe favorite and least favorite things?
Well, so this is where I want to inject the theory of constraints, and I
Okay,
warned
please
you
do.
about this
Yes,
beforehand,
you
and
did.
you kind of very eloquently talked a little bit about it already. So the theory of constraints is this idea in art that constraints are necessary for the creation of good art. And so, like, the icon of this is the starving artist who has to be really
Mm,
creative about being able to tell a story with limited means. I mean, there are different manifestations of this. One that comes immediately to my mind at this moment is Alexander Dumas writing the Three Musketeers. It's a guy who was desperate for money. He had to churn this thing out as quickly as possible. So there are other cases in which artists have kind of, they don't necessarily have to starve, but constraints inspire people to do things more creatively. Like if you read about like the making of movies,
right.
a lot of times, a lot of the best things in movies happen because they were operating on a limited budget, or they had to shoot something really quickly, or they didn't get the actor that they wanted, or whatever the constraint was. And I'm not saying everybody out there has to ascribe to this notion, but when I saw this movie and I had to write a review of it for the college newspaper afterwards,
Hmm.
that was on my mind. I didn't know that there was actually a formal theory called the theory of constraints. It just was, it's striking to me that this movie had an incredibly big budget. And it just seemed like that whoever made it got distracted by the things they could spend a lot of money on, like the special effects and the costumes and the sets and so forth, and lost track of the story and the characters. And
Yes. Yes.
and that's a theme right through movie making, not just with Star Trek the motion picture, but for decades to come. Is like there are very often these huge budget movies where it's like, did they hire a writer? Does this person know how to write? Like what the hell? I just walked out of there, at the theater thinking, well, that was like a very expensive cock up. That if they
Yes.
had less money and they had to then kind of work a little harder at making the movie, it might have been a much better movie.
No, agreed. And that in some ways feeds into the next movie we're going to talk about, which did have constraints.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, my brain goes multiple places. Let's talk about favorites and least favorite.
Okay.
Do you have 3 to 5 favorite things about this
I
movie?
have 3 to 5 favorite things. So I put down the opening scene
Okay.
with the Klingons, Spock's arc, the fact that there was more space in this, just as a
Yeah, yeah.
as an astronomy nerd, that was nice.
Sure, sure.
The alien design of V'ger was nice.
Hmm.
To a limited extent, the evolutionary dead end concept, but I think that they fumbled the ball at the goal line
Yes, they
on
did.
on that one. So those are my positives.
Yeah, I know what I was going to say. I got myself distracted, and I'll get to my favorites. I think that, as I understand it, there were a lot of rewrites on the fly on this movie, which is again an example of not allowing there to be constraints.
Yes.
And that the last scene was written, as I understand it, kind of on the fly, which it
Hmm.
feels like it. It almost, and I was going to mention a minute ago, all of a sudden Decker's calling Kirk Jim out of nowhere toward the
Right.
end of the movie. And it just feels like all of a sudden they're more comfortable with one another for no good reason. And then they come to this, this resolution with the toddler business.
Right.
But yeah, I think I think Roddenberry wasn't constrained is part of the problem. So my three favorite things, um, I realize it's the music, and this is no
Mm,
particular order. The music, the Enterprise model, and the Klingons in general, which I realize has nothing to do. Those three things have nothing to do with the story,
right.
right?
Yeah.
These are the things that I really like about this movie. And then what about your three least favorite things?
Can I go
Or
more than
five?
three?
Oh, you can
Okay.
go as many as you want. It's an
So
infinite number of wishes.
so I would say both Kirk and Shatner.
Hmm.
Kirk the character and Shatner's acting is
Yeah,
just it's just like something's crawling under your skin to watch him.
yeah, yeah.
It's um the filler, as you said, the overlong scenes, the special effects heavy scenes that are intended to put you in awe, but instead put you to sleep. And the utter lack of originality. I
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I when we talk about Wrath of Khan, they're clearly cribbing from things, but they're doing it in very open ways, and they're
Yes,
cribbing from good things, and they're
yes,
doing it in a good way. Here,
yes,
it's like, let's make the changeling again, but make it 2 hours,
yes,
buku, millions of dollars, and ultimately boring.
yes. That's right. Is that your
I
whole
did
list?
well. So the other thing I say, it's not really a negative. The unintentional humor, still, in a way, it's just like like watching on anything on Mystery Science Theater, right? So, torpedoes away.
That should be in your
What
favorite list.
that should be exactly. So, like, if this movie didn't exist, I wouldn't be able to laugh at that.
That's right. So my least favorite things, and one I think we have fully in common, which is Kirk in general, I'm going to have more to say about the contrast with Kirk in this movie and in Wrath of Khan in the next episode. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of it was Shatner, how much it was Roddenberry's writing, how much it was Wise's direction. I don't know, but he doesn't. You're right. He's uncomfortable, but not in a way that's interesting. He's a jerk. He's not nice. He's not a hero in the way that he
No,
needs to be. And it's not even like we're exploring something interesting about his development as a human being, as a character. It's just there it is. His naked ambition to get back to the center seat without any sort of consideration about what that means to anybody else. I didn't like. I didn't like Ilea. The character didn't make a lot of sense to me. It was unfortunate to have these. I would even say Riker, excuse me, Decker and Ilea. They're not worthy of the screen time that they get uh, versus maybe other
no.
characters or other, and they're not interesting enough as written.
Yeah,
I
we get
think
nothing about Decker. It's
no.
just like his whole character is, I'm miffed that Kirk has taken over. That's
Yeah, I
it.
mean, we presume again. I think I don't know if it's ever actually written down. Presumably, he's the son of Commodore Decker who died in the Doomsday Machine.
Yeah, but
But
we
it's
never hear that.
that would be a much more interesting backstory that's Kirk helped him get this job after all this whatever, and then now he's
Yeah,
taken away from him or what have you. Yeah, he's just there. And I'll admit, what I know about Stephen Collins' personal life also probably affects the way I look at that guy on screen these days. But anyway,
yeah,
Google it if you must. I think in general, there's a theme I keep coming to, which is it's ideas over character, ideas over story, as if just introducing an idea of something is sufficient,
yeah.
and not really. It's just the characters. The only character who feels like himself is McCoy.
Mhm.
And while there's some possibility, I mean, there's a possible, again, when I say ideas over story and character, yeah, there's an idea about what would it be like for James Kirk to be promoted up to the Admiralty and really want to be on the starship. That's an interesting idea, but it needs character development and narrative to explain it. Spock is trying to decide how to deal with logic and emotion and what that means to him.
Right.
These are interesting character possibilities. Instead we're presented with, Spock is this and then Spock is that, and not really developing it adequately. And Kirk doesn't really develop it all in this movie. I mean, I'll project forward all the way to Star Trek Generations, where Kirk is in the Nexus, and supposedly in the Nexus you live your perfect life,
Yeah.
That life should have been on the bridge of the Enterprise, not
Right.
making breakfast for his wife and or whatever in a cabin in the woods. James Kirk wants to be at the center seat. That's who he sees himself as. But it's not really. It's better discussed in the next film, which we'll get to next week. But
Yeah.
I mean,
So I almost put on my list Robert Wise
okay,
negatives.
yeah,
And I didn't because I don't know whether he was to blame for a lot of the problems with this movie. You look at his work, like for example, I mentioned Day
hmm
the Earth Stood Still. Great movie, including on rewatch. And people don't act weirdly,
hmm
and the story is good, and not that you can say that the director is responsible for the story, but the director can certainly have an influence over the story. And I just really wonder. So sorry, listeners, I didn't get time to research this. I just wonder if whether A, he was the wrong director for this movie,
right.
B, he just was at a point in his career where he just didn't care,
Well,
or C, apparently, this one of the big stories of this movie is that Roddenberry so interfered with everything in this
yes,
movie that at some point it just became impossible for him to direct it effectively. I don't know.
no, I think it is impossible not to say that the tonality of a movie is not at least substantially the result of a director.
Hmm.
Now, how much of, and this is something that we talked about at the top of the episode, I mean, how much of it was this sort of, we're going to make a serious capital S movie,
Yeah.
and the seriousness of it is more than the Star Trekness of it all? I don't know. And again, I think, but also Roddenberry's got to receive some blame because yes, he wrote the script or, was a co-author. I forget if he's the sole author of the script. I don't think that he is. Um, but clearly he was interfering in the production, and he at this point has clearly thought of himself as the great bird of the galaxy and the
Right.
guiding light of Star Trek. I mean, we'll get to this in a future episode. I know. I think some of what's wrong with Star Trek: The Motion Picture you can see in Star Trek: The Next Generation, the first season,
Oh,
which
definitely.
Roddenberry was very much, central to.
Yeah, tonally
Um,
too, like
yeah,
or lack of tone.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and but I mean, the biggest problem in the movie is Kirk. Kirk is it just. Well, we'll talk about that next
Yeah.
episode. But
So this movie was such a disappointment to me and also to other people I knew.
yeah,
I think the best opinion was the sort of the typical response of people. Well, I watched a movie, it was a spectacle, I wasted 2 hours of my life. That's about the best that nobody loved this movie.
right,
And that
right,
there were
right, right.
people who just really actively disliked it. And I just thought at the time, this might be the end of Star Trek here.
Sure.
This bloated movie that was boring to a lot of people. How the hell is Star Trek going to continue past this?
I mean, the reason it continues is it didn't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also the origin of the all the odd number ones are bad starts with this one,
Yes.
which I don't think is entirely fair because I think Star Trek 3 is a good movie, but Star Trek 5, but I'd rather watch 5 than
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
Um, I'm not I'm not sure it's the worst Star Trek movie, but it's toward the bottom for sure.
definitely. I think for the level of disappointment I had at the time, it would be my
Oh,
worst. If
I
that were the measure of it,
I think
uh,
that's
is
fair.
it worse than five? I kind of think so.
I think
Five is
five is more
goofy.
it's more entertaining
Yeah.
and but it also doesn't stand up to a lot of scrutiny. In some ways it's better than Generations in the sense that Generations
Yeah.
just is not a very good movie. It may be better than I've only watched Nemesis once. I know people hate Nemesis, but I don't know if it's as bad as Nemesis or not. But
Now you're
it's
reminding me of some of the duds of the Next Generation era. Like
unfortunately
Insurrection is kind of
Insurrection. I think I'd have to watch it again. I think I'll say this to be maybe a little more positive. I think that the motion picture attempts to do something it maybe doesn't quite. It doesn't quite. Well, I know it does. It doesn't achieve what it sets out to do, but it
yeah.
does try to tell. an interesting story that has these big themes in it, that even does have some character development. It just doesn't hit the mark and it focuses too much on ideas and not character. In some ways, it's kind of like The Cage, which also was a Roddenberry, focused thing that didn't quite hit. It was the ideas are in some ways more important than some of the characters, and then it took the next movie, the next pilot, to really catapult the characters. It has some high quality stuff in it, but it just fails ultimately.
Yeah, sadly.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, so how about merch? Did you have any merch at the time?
I don't remember having anything except for maybe at some point I acquired a die-cast metal model of the
Mm,
Enterprise, this Enterprise, not
yes.
the original series
Yes.
Enterprise, but I don't recall it having anything else.
So I know that I had a model of the Enterprise at
Hmm.
some point. I think in fact I made it twice. So I'm pretty sure I made it as a younger kid, after the motion picture. And I also remember having an issue of I meant to look this up, so maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Remember Dynamite magazine?
Oh yeah,
Scholastic.
yeah.
So there was one issue that had preview. That's when I first
Uh,
saw the some stills from the movie and had a poster in it. So I had that. Was there anything you would have wanted?
I had to think a lot about this. And this may be the ultimate uh, capstone of my distaste for this movie. I thought, like, what would I like? An icon of something sitting on my desk or whatever. It was. I would have liked a Voyager model
Okay.
because Voyager was had just been the probe has just been launched, and there was the kind of the telemetry and pictures from Jupiter that came back. And anyway, as a space nerd, it would have been nice to have a Voyager model, but none of the Star Trek stuff from this movie is anything that I would have wanted to have.
So I would have wanted those D7s, the movie D7s.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair. Especially if
But
they shot
again,
those torpedoes out. That
well,
would have been
yes,
great.
good stuff in general. Okay. Any parting thoughts about Star Trek: The Motion Picture that we haven't hit?
Wow, I can't wait to talk about the Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, I think that'll be a palate cleanser. So we look forward to that discussion next week on Ancient Geeks. Thanks for being with us. Bye bye.
Looks like it's time for us to merge with V'ger and ascend to a higher plane. So that does it for this episode of Ancient Geeks. Thanks for listening. You can find us on the podcast platform or app of your choice, where if you feel so inclined, we're always grateful for reviews. And please subscribe. If you have kind words for us or other words for us, contact us directly at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. You can also find us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets where we post all kinds of things in between episodes. All content copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.